Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbender, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Mayoka from UdoU. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Bienvenidos to this episode of I Have Something to Say. I am very excited to have as our guest today, Edgardo Miranda-Rodríguez, the creator of La Borinqueña. And we'll get into that in a minute, but also the mastermind behind Somos Arte, an independent production company based out of Brooklyn. And you've been an entrepreneur for a while, right, Edgardo?
Yeah, it's almost 20 years. Been 20 years. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank
Yes,
you. Thank
and
you.
I want to congratulate you also for your recent award, the Eisner Award in 2019. It's a humanitarian award too, right? For the
Yeah.
work that you've been doing in recent years. And so we'll talk about all of that in detail, but I wanted to really talk to you about your origins. Like, when did you know, right, that you were a creator, that you were an artist, that you were an entrepreneur? Like, what really sparked that fire, right, in the pit of your stomach, to say, this is the avenue, this is my form of expression?
I guess the seeds were very early on in my childhood. I grew up, full disclosure, by the time I was 18, I lived in about 24 different places. We moved around a lot. I lived throughout New York City. A lot of my formative years were in the South Bronx. These memories that I'll share with you were during my time living on Webster Avenue. I vividly remember walking down the street, either walking my dog or coming home from school, and I'd collect bottles and cans. Now, ironically, that was the 1980s when you'd receive a nickel, and it's like 30 years later, 30, 40 years later, it's still only a nickel to get a bottle and a
Yeah.
can. So
How sad,
that
right?
unfortunately hasn't changed. But back in the 80s, you could buy a comic book for like 50 or 60 cents. Nowadays, you need like anywhere from $5 to $6 to buy a comic book. So I would collect comics. And I would buy these comics from the money I would make from returning bottles and cans. And then I would craft my own original stories. And these would be commissioned by my fellow classmates at elementary school, make enough money and buy my own comics. So it was kind of a, a, a
That was your
set up to feed my own addiction. Let's
yes,
just
it
say
was
that.
like
It was
your
definitely
hustle.
not set up to create a larger profitable plan. It was more like, well, I need money to buy comics, so let me make
Yes.
comics to buy comics.
Yes, but that's really cool. So then you started your hustle,
Yeah,
your
that was it. That
entrepreneurship.
was
Yeah,
my South Bronx hustle. While everybody else was doing a lot of illegal stuff, I was actually like hustling art and stories.
that is awesome. That is really great. But it's actually, that's how you started to build a muscle for entrepreneurship then, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that was honestly it. I wasn't
yes.
aware of it, but that was honestly it. And it wouldn't be until goodness, the dot-com bubble burst.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that was right around the time of September 11th, right? And
Yeah.
we're here we are, the 20th anniversary of September 11th, but it was around that very same time the US economy was experiencing a bubble bursting, which was
Yeah.
this new industry, which was the internet.
Yes.
And everyone was still navigating, right, this territory, this landscape. People were creating platforms to produce content, but oftentimes the technology wasn't up to speed, literally. There was
Mm-hmm.
no broadband, there was no you know high speed internet. Most of us around that era still had dial up, and maybe some of us had DSL.
Mm-hmm.
So the industry was growing a lot faster than the technology actually could supply it. So I, instead of actually continually looking for work, decided to just pursue a full-time approach to the work that I was already doing on the side. Even though I had my day
Mhm.
job as a designer, working for .com companies, I was still on the side designing
Mhm.
posters, postcards, lo que sea. And one of my very first clients was Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, who is the founder, one of the co-founders of El Museo del Barrio, the Caribbean Cultural Center, and Corredor Afro, an Afro profit in Puerto Rico. And
Mhm.
she was literally one of my first clients, and she gave me my first major contract when I first decided to launch this studio, this idea, and beautifully enough, full circle, I would say maybe like 15 years, no, maybe like 16 years after that, I would actually end up giving her a grant through our La Borinqueña grants program. So this is a woman
Wow.
who gave me my start professionally and still is a part of my life. In a lot of ways, she is a madrina to me,
Yeah.
and she's always guided me professionally, spiritually, culturally. She gave me ideas that helped me write my first comic book story for Marvel. So
Yeah.
it was full circle in 2018 when we were giving away grants for the first time via the work that we do with La Borinqueña. Our
Yeah.
grants division. I should always acknowledge my partner Kyung Jun Miranda. It was her
Mhm.
idea to actually start our grants program. She really truly believed in creating a sustainable program that would provide resources to nonprofits in Puerto Rico beyond the crisis of Hurricane Maria, and that
Yeah.
it is important to address the colonial status of Puerto Rico by providing the resources to help these organizations to continue to do the truly heroic work that they do every day in Puerto Rico. But back then, those were the seeds that were planted. As a child, making my own comic books. 20 years ago, starting my own design studio and having Marta Moreno Vega as my first client. I would eventually find myself in creating a niche for myself where I'd provide
Mhm.
services mostly to nonprofits here in New York City or organizations that culturally associated with the upliftment and celebration of our Latinx heritage.
Mhm. That's fantastic. And so from a formal design education, right? So you
Actually,
had that
no, no,
you never got any formal
no, man,
that's
no, no,
awesome.
Sammy, not at all. Al propósito. I went to a beautiful university. I got my bachelor's degree from Colgate University, but I was sociology and anthropology
Are you serious?
major.
That
Yeah,
is
in
awesome.
serio.
That
That
is
was my
awesome.
major. I was set up. May he rest in peace. My mentor at Colgate, Dr. Bryce Laporte, Afro Panameño, brilliant man, was mentoring me to go to graduate school. Pero yo era cabeza y dura. I didn't want to listen to his guidance. He had connections at the new school. He was like, Edgardo, tú tienes que estudiar, tú tienes que seguir con tu estudio,
Yeah,
and he was
yeah,
like, I will introduce you to my colleagues at the new school. We'll get you a scholarship. And I'm like, "Pa qué? I want to do stuff now." And I was
yeah.
very young, I was 22, 23. I wanted to dive headfirst into activism, into work in the community. And I
Mhm.
came to New York City to work with both Iris Morales as
Mhm.
her artistic director of the documentary Palante Siempre Palante, which is to date the only comprehensive film that really discusses the Young Lords movement, which is the social political organization founded by Puerto Ricanos here in the United States. It started in Chicago by Chacha Jimenez, and then he branched off to New York City, Philadelphia, as well as Puerto Rico itself. And this film not only documented the historical rise of this organization, but the aftermath. Like,
Yeah.
what was the legacy? How did they deal after the organization was dissolved by the counterintelligence program of the U.S. government? So
Mhm.
I left college to work on that, and my other professional area was working as a community organizer for El Puente, which was founded by the late Luis Garden Acosta, and that
Yeah.
was, to me, honestly, that was graduate school for me.
Yes.
Learning under an amazing madrina like Iris Morales gave me the skills to really see how powerful the arts could be to
Yeah.
not only achieve a career, but to advocate for our people and to advocate in a way that was intersectional, right? That it wasn't just
Yes.
we're gonna produce a film for entertainment purposes, but we could produce a film that could document history, that could engage people in a discourse around social change, and more
Mhm.
so can be used as a tool in the classrooms. You know, not only in
Yes.
elementary through high school, but even at the undergraduate through the graduate levels.
Yes, absolutely. So that's how this all happened. Your activism, rolling up your sleeves and really utilizing the arts really for social impact, but then all of this multimedia experience. So it wasn't no theory here, right? It was all
No,
application. It was all
it was
application
all
basically.
application. It was all at the trial and error. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of it was, for me at least, was intuitiveness. I've
Yeah.
always had an inclination for a natural inclination for spatial design, for typographic
Mhm.
design, for illustrating, for sequential art,
Yeah.
storytelling. But I never received a formal education for any of this, nor did I
Mhm.
receive any formal education for business development. In the 20
Yeah.
years that I've been working my own design studio, I've never had a business plan. You
Yeah.
know, we've been surviving and thriving based on just kind of being just ahead of the curve,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, literally, I started off designing just printed materials and
Yeah.
collateral. I mean, I
Yeah.
literally learned this industry jargon as I was working. As I picked
Yeah.
up clients, they would ask me for certain
Yeah.
things, and I was like, what does that mean? You know?
Yeah, I know. I
We
know. It's
we need assets, we need some, key art. And I was like,
yeah, you're
"¿Qué
like,
rayo es esto?"
exactly.
Entonces,
And what are
arte
the
con llave. Entonces, lo
KPIs?
que
And I'm
hagan
like,
es
KPIs, yeah, what is that? Yeah, I
yeah, and
know.
every industry, every professional industry has its own vernacular,
Lingo,
every
yeah.
its own lexicon, its own jargon, and it's
Hmm.
something that I've come to know. I'll have conversations with my work with many different industries, and I'll literally, stop somebody in the midst of the conversation and be like, "I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with your vernacular.
Hmm.
I don't work in your industry, so I don't know what you're talking about." And I learned that
Yeah.
from one of my professors in in college, because I had a professor, Professor Harvey Sindima, from the country Mali, and he used to always tell me, "There's never such a thing as a bad question." He literally said the bad question is the question that's never asked. And I would
Right.
interpret it as the question that you didn't ask that in the end makes you look like a Juan Bobo. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I always ask questions. I am
Yeah.
literally the only dude that will be driving, and if I before GPS, and be like, pull over and be like, how do I get to point A, point B? I'm
Right.
not the dude that's gonna be like, I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna figure it
Yeah.
out. Nah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to the women that mentored me.
Hmm.
So it's like this whole like development of my business literally was something that was a work in progress. It was literally
Hmm.
only that. It was something that I was open to continually learn.
Hmm.
I'm 51, and I still see myself as an individual that's always open to learn and always open to try and explore new things. Particularly as an entrepreneur, you have to
Hmm.
always be flexible and
Hmm.
apply new solutions and also new voices. I'm
Yeah.
working in a field right now where some of the artists that work for me are half my age, and
Hmm.
that's viable for me because they're bringing in fresh new perspectives. They're using social media and technology in a way that I don't, so they have a different perspective that I have to respect and listen to, because it actually helps us with the work that we're doing.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And yeah, and it's so I think that that's a common thread amongst a lot of entrepreneurs and Latino and Black entrepreneurs, Asian entrepreneurs, that we don't have in our family. Sometimes we're the first one in our
Yeah.
family to go into entrepreneurship, and most of the time it's just because we kind of have to put food on the table, right? And so then we're not afforded that luxury of experimentation, of discovery. It's like you just have to do it and get it
Well,
done and figure it out as you go along, and
I would
then
say
just
I would say yes. I would say yes and no to that. Yes,
okay.
because if you're coming from the particularly for if you as Puerto Riqueños, like us, right? We're migrants. We're just moving from Puerto Rico to anywhere in the United States, just like if you move from Texas to Philadelphia or from New York to California, right? But anyone else of color that's coming with that immigrant perspective, or obviously at the African American community, which has its own legacy, unfortunately, due to the institution of slavery and how, culture, heritage, identity was completely stripped from this population, right? We come to the United States in a deficit, but one of the things that's important to understand and note, and I think that, I'm at a point in my life where I cannot hear or participate in a discourse that equates being Black, brown, of color with poor and working class.
Agreed.
Right. And that we all have this experience of struggle. We all have this experience of coming up. We all can relate to, a free block of cheese. No, we don't. And ironically, it's with the work that I'm doing with La Borinqueña that I've really opened my eyes to that, where I'm meeting, generational wealth. I'm meeting Puerto Riqueños, for example, who never felt the need to migrate to the United States during the 1940s through 60s because of Operation Bootstrap, because they were living well off. They didn't have to leave Puerto Rico, and or walking through Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, like a year after, and seeing a lot of affluent communities looking as if nothing even happened to them, right? So there is it's an interesting conversation, because when you look at the narrative of people of color who are entrepreneurs, you have to look at it as first generation educated, meaning college education, right? First generation professional beyond, well, for the most part, a lot of working class Puerto Ricans, we either worked in factories or in some sort of manufacturing element, or if we delved into entrepreneurism, it was either like, running bodegas, dry cleaners, restaurants, service
industries,
right? But not so much these professional industries like marketing, advertising, medicine, media, technology, right? That's something new. So it's like my generation as now as a father, right? Because I'm a father of two boys. Not only am I the first person in my family to graduate with a college degree, I'm also the first person to be an entrepreneur, to start my own company that is not, even though technically it is service oriented because I'm providing a service in design, it's not in the traditional sense of service, right? I'm showing my sons multiple firsts. First to graduate from a junior Ivy League university, first to start my own business, first to start my own um independently published graphic novel series. I mean, like first, right? And that is reflective of my experience coming from a poor, not even working class, a poor family, raised by a single mother with on public assistance. I, at a very young age, recognized that the only thing that was going to break this cycle of poverty was going to be my education. I easily could have taken a route of another form of entrepreneurism, which many of my peers did, which could have led me to incarceration, which could have led me to drug addiction, which could have led me to any other form of unfortunate crime, right? Or I could have taken a completely different route and just found, like, a value in just finding a job immediately after high school, even during high school, and saying, oh, I just need a job right now. And honestly, many of us do, right? But I took, like the path seldom traveled. I decided to go to college with no como digo reference, with no plan. I'm helping my son right now going. Carajo. I'm helping my son right now go to college, right? He's applying for universities and private colleges, right? And we're guiding him, right? My wife and I, and it's like, and both of us, my wife comes from a working class Korean American family, but when she was dropped off at Boston College, she literally was just dropped off, like,
Right.
see you later, right? And it's like, and it's that kind of like, that's also something that's important to understand, because even when you're the first to start a business, the first to get this higher level of education, no one knows how to guide you. So you're
Yeah.
guiding. So I mean, I'm an 18-year-old in college. What the heck do I know about guiding the rest of my life with my education? I'm doing that for
Right.
myself. I'm
Right.
doing that now with my studio. When I hire younger artists, I not only provide them with work and professional opportunities, but I'm guiding them in their
Yeah.
careers beyond the work that I'm providing. So it's oftentimes not just an entrepreneurial endeavor, but it's also like a social responsibility
And
that I
commitment. Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I speak from my experience, and my work has introduced me to incredible opportunities and incredible people who have successful businesses, and generational successful businesses. Like I'm working
Yeah.
closely with the Cortez family, who as many who may or may not know, founded Chocolate Cortez
Of
92
course.
years ago. And
Yeah.
this is like 4 or 5 generations of a family that's been running this business,
Yeah.
and I've learned so much, not only culturally but professionally, working alongside this family, But
Yeah.
that's not all of us,
Yeah.
So that's why sometimes it's important to delineate, to say that
Hmm.
when we can't just equate being brown and black as being, oh, we all poor. No, because there is, not overwhelmingly, but there is some families that are Latinx and that are African American that have had the opportunity to have a form of generational wealth. Not many generations, maybe two or
Yeah.
three, maybe even 2 generations, right? Um, but it's there, and
Hmm.
we can't act like it doesn't exist at all. But I can honestly say with my family, this is my generation, literally, like me and my
Hmm.
brother, exactly. We're the first ones to own property, the first ones to
Yeah.
start our own business. He's a
Yeah.
completely different field than I am, but this is what my sons are growing up. To
Yeah.
them,
That's awesome.
esto es lo normal. Esto es
Sí,
lo
ahora
normal.
sí, pero para esta nueva generación, right? Because there's more of us doing
Yeah,
this. And,
there is.
and so, yeah. So, and that's what I mean about modeling behaviors. Like in our generation, yeah, you had the Cortés y los Sidrin and these families, right? For example, in
Exacto.
Puerto Rico, but there were few and far between. I feel like
Of
in the last
course. Oh
20,
yeah.
30 years, now we finally I can sense this right from just hearing you speak and your trajectory that to you as well, entrepreneurship and activism are one and the same, right? are
Oh,
are not
certainly.
are not mutually exclusive, but are actually the way to move the needle and also even attain social justice and generational wealth, right?
It's all about, yeah, it's all about addressing the inequities, and inequities aren't just about dismantling institutions that perpetuate systemic racism, but
Yeah.
also like economic injustice.
Mm-hmm.
Leveling the playing field so that a Latina is not at the bottom of the economic food chain,
Yeah.
literally. White man, white woman, black man, white, etc. And then at the
Yeah.
bottom, those
Yeah.
like Latina. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Addressing the inequities that exist within the industry, like particularly my industry of storytelling with comic books, that is overwhelmingly dominated by men, and most of those men are white. You
Yeah.
know, so yeah, there's a lot, and the work that I'm doing. I was just talking to one of our colleagues who's working with me. One of my newest projects is working with the Department of State, and under
Mhm.
the Department of State, I'm an arts envoy, so I'm teaching. Um, Professionals, students, and activists throughout Latin America how to use graphic novels as a tool for social justice, for organizing,
Wow.
and also for entrepreneurism,
Yeah.
right? I'm using my book as a model. But one of the things that I do with my La Borinqueña books is that I don't dedicate 365 days of the year just to publishing this book. I publish a book every other year, or sometimes every 2 or 3 years. Uh, I dedicate most of the time with this project to philanthropy, to activism, to organizing, to
Mhm.
education.
Mhm.
This month through October is the busiest period for me. It's Hispanic
Yeah.
Heritage Month, but
Right.
universities consistently over the last 5 years have been seeking me out. I've already
Mhm.
booked appearances at MIT and Boston College this semester alone. And
Yeah.
so it's to show like where this work that I've developed on my own has gone, but not
Yeah.
not for the form of saying not for bragging rights, but to say
See,
no,
see?
because this is a project that is entrepreneurial, obviously in its nature, because it's a publication that is being sold, but it's also a tool that's being used for social change. That's
Yes.
why it goes along with what you're saying. That is, yes, my approach to my profession of being an entrepreneur is intrinsically linked with my activism.
Mhm.
One is connected to the other. It's not one separate from the other. It's
Right.
actually one combined um initiative.
Yeah, totally. So La Borinqueña, leading up. So we know where you stand. I mean, I think it's more than clear. We know the spark and that, vision that you had, for your art and for this path that you've taken, right? Into entrepreneurship, activism, social involvement, all of that good stuff. Great mentors through this journey. And so how did you birth La Borinqueña? How did you decide this is the right time? And I know what probably provoked it with Hurricane Maria. We kind of addressed that a little bit, but I want to know what was leading up to it. What are those 2-3 years before? What were you working on right before La Borinqueña? And then all of a sudden, Hurricane Maria hit our beloved Puerto Rico, and you did. This is the time.
Well, I have to take you back even before Hurricane Maria. A lot of people who
Mm-hmm.
discover La Borinqueña recently oftentimes equate our genesis from when Hurricane Maria, the Category 5 hurricane, hit Puerto Rico, right?
Mm-hmm.
But truth be told, La Borinqueña originated a year and a half before Hurricane Maria actually touched
Oh,
Earth.
that's awesome.
Professionally, before I started working on La Borinqueña, I had been through my studio working with celebrities, developing their ideas into graphic novels.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those celebrities included Daryl DMC McDaniels of Run DMC, John Leguizamo of Stage Screen, and well, from the big screen to the little screen. And John
Yeah.
Leguizamo has done it all and continues to do it all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, After working with those two, I developed the professional experience to feel comfortable enough to move into creating and publishing my own work.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, I had zero publishing experience, zero production experience in graphic novel work. I approached the work initially like I would approach any other design project that I would acquire through a client,
Mm-hmm.
by putting together a collective of professionals that would work under my creative direction, um, and working towards the goal of having a finally produced product.
Mm-hmm.
With La Borinqueña, it was actually around December of 2015. Governor Padilla of
Mm-hmm.
Puerto Rico at the time had spoke at a press conference to publicly declare that Puerto Rico had amassed an $80 billion debt that was now
Mm-hmm.
going to be paid off. And that sent shockwaves throughout the financial industry.
Right.
Interestingly enough, no one else is really talking about it. Why would Wall Street? Why would Bloomberg News? Why would all of these conservative and financial institutions that cover media be so concerned about the debt of Puerto Rico? Because it meant that they were going to default on the debt of a lot of banks. Because
Mm-hmm.
to save the Puerto Rican economy, at one point, the Puerto Rican government had decided to sell bonds,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a good idea in a kind of like of a brainstorm moment, because we sell bonds to Puerto Ricanos invest back in Puerto Rico, and these will be like three tier bonus bonds, no local, no state, no federal tax bonds, right? But there were no limitations onto who could buy these bonds. And what
Mm-hmm.
was happening was Wall Street vulture hedge funders were buying up all these bonds, and they buy
Mm-hmm.
them up for people. And before we knew it, more people were owning these bonds than weren't Puerto Rican,
Mm-hmm.
than weren't even connected directly to the island. So when this debt was going to go into default, there was panic in the financial market. There was extreme panic. And I immediately saw this as we are on the precipice of a significant humanitarian crisis. This is going to affect Puerto Rico. This is going to lead to, and it did, it led to anywhere from 300 to 400 public schools closing in Puerto Rico. It
Yes.
led to an increase in tuition in the public and universities across the island. But it also, this was endemic to the island's colonial status, because if you look back, you realize that what set this off was the overturning of Tax Code 936 by 2009. But what set that off was 10 years prior, during Bill Clinton's administration, when a Republican House and Congress was telling him Puerto Rico's pharmaceutical industry is not paying taxes, and they're not giving the U.S. close to $6 billion in tax revenue. But that's also a reflection of decades before that, in the 1970s, when they introduced this tax code in the first place to try to boost the economy of Puerto Rico, because even before that, there was a thriving petroleum industry in Puerto Rico. And when OPEC was created, the petroleum industry dissolved, and all of this history is completely like eliminated. And how Puerto Rico at one point in 1898, when the United States initially invaded Puerto Rico and initiated the Spanish-American War with Spain, Puerto Rico at that time was actually a thriving economy, so much so that they had to give Spain money to go into war against the United States. And when the United States obviously won that war, they absorbed Spain's debt and Puerto Rico's revenue and surplus.
And
And
resources.
so all of this was all connected to what was going to be announced in 2015. 2015 was literally the straw that broke the camel's back, as it said. And I thought to myself, goodness, wouldn't it be amazing if someone created some, I don't know, artistic project that would bring awareness to this? You know, I'm from the generation that grew up with music like We Are the World, or Sun City, which was like a collaboration of like hip hop artists and rockers that were against apartheid, you know, and all of this kind of like humanitarian work done by artists and celebrities to raise awareness and to raise money. And I looked at Kyung and I said, I guess I should do it, right? But I didn't know what that would be. So that kind of stayed in the back of my mind. I released my first book with Marvel in February of 2016. And I just go down to Forbidden Planet in Union Square here in New York City. And Kyung and I walk into the comic shop, and she's like, oh, let me take a picture with you holding your comics. I was super excited. And I'm like, holding up my comic book. And I posted on my social media accounts. And within days, or within that same week, my cousin from Puerto Rico reaches out to me and says, "Mira, tú saliste en lo periódico." And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I thought, surfing the internet to see what he's talking about. And there it is. The exact same picture that Kyung took of me at Forbidden Planet was in Primera Hora, was in all of these Puerto Rican newspapers. You know, it was like, autor boricua escribiendo para Marvel. All of a sudden I was like being equated with like the head of Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, in Puerto Rico. And I was like, oh my gosh. But I didn't see this as like like a mistake, or like I saw this as an opportunity. I was like, wow, there's a real hunger. There's a real hunger out there for representation. There's a real hunger out there for storytellers that look like me. And then, as I'm kind of meditating on this, the emails and the phone calls started coming in. And I remember at the time, the first person was a woman by the name of Rosa Cruz, who was working for the government of Puerto Rico in their New York office, which over the last administration was actually officially closed. But they used to have an office here that would handle any local affairs related to Puerto Rico in New York City. And so she reached out to me, and she was a conduit. She would connect me to the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, the Loisaida Cultural Center, and the Puerto Rican Day Parade. And all of these institutions wanted to celebrate me. Loisaida gave me a gallery space to produce an exhibition. Centro gave me a gallery space and a day to produce an event. And I produced a talk around Latinx in the comic book industry. And I called the event Café con Comics. And then the Puerto Rican Day Parade, they decide that they want to honor me and give me a float. And I was like, whoa,
Ooh.
wow. I only wrote one comic book, yo. I was like, you want to do all this for me for just this one comic? And I said, but wait, I got a better idea. And I thought about the economic crisis that was
Mm.
announced back at the end of 2015. And I told the parade organizers, I was like, I have a new superhero. Can I debut her at your parade?
Oh
And
my
everybody,
gosh.
yeah, why not? So I
Yeah.
sketched out this idea for my superhero. I created a kind of like an origin story for her. No comic book.
Yeah.
No comic book. In
Uh-huh.
fact, the first image that was kind of like ever seen of La Borinqueña was this one. So this image of
Yeah.
La Borinqueña was the first one that was produced, right? And that
Wow.
was a comic book cover or pinup, whatever you may want to call it, of her
Yeah.
flying down Fifth Avenue, right?
Love it.
And that image was revealed at this Puerto Rican Day Parade press conference in May of 2016, and that was what my mom would call a "pa que fue eso" moment, because at the end of this press
For
conference,
English speakers, like, well, what? That's like,
at the end of
what?
the press conference, I'm swarmed by all the media that's attending this event,
Yeah.
newspapers, bloggers, television stations. I was set up with interviews with NBC, CNN, Fox that week, and it was amazing. All
Mhm.
over just this one image of a Puerto Rican superhero that I was set to release as a comic book. She gets her own float at the Puerto Rican Day Parade. A young law student, Stephanie Janes Martin, dresses up as La Borinqueña on a float with young high school students wearing T-shirts adorned with La Borinqueña's image, and she makes her debut. She makes her
That's great.
debut in June of 2016. I get to the stage, and everyone is looking forward to interview me, and here I am on ABC News Live. And instead of getting into a discourse around her superpowers or
Yeah.
she's better than
You're
this
talking
hero,
about the issues.
I
Yeah.
talk about the issues, and that's exactly what it is.
Fantastic.
I bring to the forefront the economic crisis affecting Puerto Rico. Now, in the actual story itself,
Mm-hmm.
I decide that I'm gonna delve into environmental justice. I had a conversation with Kyung about what direction the narrative could take because I didn't want to have a supervillain. I knew that I
Right.
was creating a woman as a character, and I didn't want this character as a woman to be defined by a relationship, even if it were dysfunctional between her and a supervillain. So
Mm-hmm.
after a conversation with Kyung, she said, Puerto Rico's always hit with hurricanes. What if the narrative is around the hurricane? And I told her, well, I've also been following the work of Dr. Jose Molinille, a leading scientist who's hosted various summits in Puerto Rico around climate change. And he's also been saying the same thing about hurricanes. But in addition to that, he's saying that the island is going to be hit inevitably with devastating earthquakes. This was all
Mm.
in 2016. From a
Wow.
storytelling perspective, I decide I want the story to be around the hurricane.
Mm.
And the book ends, spoiler, the
Yeah.
first issue ends with her dealing with an island in a blackout, with her
Mm.
dealing with a hurricane that left the island devastated. I remember going through the meteorological website that was discussing hurricane conditions, and everything's always alphabetized. So at
Yeah.
the time, there was I forget the name of it, but at the time, there was already a K hurricane. So I said, okay, the next letter in the alphabet is L. So I named the hurricane in my comic book Luna. But if there
Mm.
was an L, knowing me, I would have probably named the hurricane Maria because that's my
Mm.
mother's name. So I'll be like, oh, let me give a shout out to my mom and name the hurricane Maria. So
Wow.
that book comes out December 2016, 10 months before Hurricane Maria actually hits Puerto Rico. I recall
Wow.
being interviewed by CNN right after Hurricane Maria hit in September, and they bring me into the studio and they're like, are you going to work on a book around Hurricane Maria and the story? And I was like, I'm already talking about the hurricane in the book. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
and I'm showing them the images from the book. And
Wow.
it wasn't a form of like, prophetic storytelling
Yeah,
or
like a
fortune.
premonition. Yeah,
It's
totally.
science. It's science. I was
Yeah.
already listening to science. I was already studying science. I was already studying the trends. I was well
Yeah.
aware that the coastal lines were receding. In the first page of La Borinqueña, she saves, and the first issue of La Borinqueña that was published 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
she saves a group of sea turtles Tinglares,
And that just
right?
happened. Yeah, the big victory just what, a week ago, 2 weeks
And
ago.
that's
Yeah.
literally happening now. And it's not, I'm not
Yeah.
prophesizing. I'm just aware that if the
Yeah.
coastal lines are receding, then these turtles that come to Puerto Rico to lay their eggs aren't going to have a place to do it.
Right. It's a
So I
matter
thought
of, yeah.
it's just a
Time.
matter of following and listening to
Hmm.
science, you know.
Yeah.
So all of this went into the book. So when I created La Borinqueña, it was not como digo, a response to Hurricane Maria. La Borinqueña existed before Hurricane Maria.
That's
So when Hurricane Maria did hit, I was
mm-hmm.
approached by DC Comics, and when DC Comics approached me, they approached me because at the time I was the only person that was publishing a full length graphic novel around an Afro Puerto Rican superhero,
Yeah.
unapologetically. She wasn't like half
Oh no,
Peruvian,
when I saw her, I
Chilean,
was like, oh my
Colombian.
God,
It
this
was
is eating
Puerto Rican,
chacon. This is eating
right?
chacon. I love it.
So when they came to me, I immediately responded and I said, "Well, what are we going to do for Puerto Rico?" And
Mm-hmm.
after that, within days of meeting them, we came into an agreement. And within months of that agreement, I published this book,
Mm-hmm.
Reconstruction. And this book
Yes.
would be the first publication of its kind, a publication that consisted of Puerto Rican writers and artists from the island, comic book artists and writers internationally, a collection of 200 writers and artists who participated in this book, a book that became a number one
Mm-hmm.
bestseller on
Mm-hmm.
Amazon for 4 months straight,
That's
a book that
awesome.
helped us generate $200,000 in revenue. So much so that my partner Kyung came to me and said, "Listen, we're not going to do a band-aid solution here. We're not just going to write a check to some large nonprofit and
Yeah.
call it a day," which is often the case when there is a crisis. The collection of blood, the collection of money, and it goes to one of these larger non-profits. She said, "Let's do something more proactive and sustainable." She said, "Let's
Mm-hmm.
create a program that awards grants, small grants, to
Mm-hmm.
small organizations that oftentimes are completely overlooked by these funding sources." And
Yep.
it's exactly what we did. The La Borinqueña Grants Program would create a program that would provide grants, and has been over the last 4 years since we initially started this program in 2018. And every year we've been awarding grants. And so this book was a response to Hurricane Maria, but it wasn't a response solely as from a storytelling perspective. It was a response in terms of like how do you decolonize philanthropy? How
Yeah.
do you approach philanthropy in a fresh new way that isn't coming from this kind of ivory tower perspective that is like, I have these resources, you have to do this and this and this and jump through hoops if you want
Yeah.
these resources. For us, it was the opposite. We were like, look, we have resources. Tell us about the amazing work that you're already doing so that we can continue to support it so that you can go a little bit further
And
than where
amplify
you're
it,
already
right?
going.
Yeah,
Right.
totally.
And
Yeah.
also amplify the work that they're doing. Use our platform
Yeah.
to amplify them so that people can become aware. So La
That's
Borinqueña was around before Hurricane Maria, was around during Hurricane Maria, and continues to be around. And it's like the work that we're doing because it's touching on environmental justice, because it's bringing awareness to Afro Latinx heritage and culture and
mm,
people. It's defying a lot of interpretations of Latinx culture and even mainstream culture
yeah.
in a way, because the book is an independently published book, and
Mm-hmm.
to this day continually receives mainstream media coverage, unlike
That's
any other
fantastic.
independent project.
That's
The kind of
fantastic.
coverage that we get is comparable to something that's put out by a major publishing company, and everything literally happens out of this small studio here in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then just to, because there's just so much. I feel like we can talk for days. But then when I thought that you had a drop the mic moment, I think that's what I sent you through LinkedIn. I'm like, just when I thought that La Borinqueña was a drop the mic moment, and then you drop loose, this Chinese Dominican. I mean, I'm like, oh my God, LGBTQ superhero, love it. I mean, how, when, why? I think I know the why, right? But
Well,
a little bit of
Luz
loose. Mm-hmm.
Luz is the latest superhero that we developed. She is actually her full name is Lauren Liu, and her nickname is Lala. And I
Uh-huh.
introduced her back in 2016. Also,
Mm.
when we first started with the idea of La Borinqueña, we were approached by the Smithsonian Museum. Smithsonian has 20 different museums, and the one that
Yeah.
approached us was the Smithsonian Museum of the Asian Pacific American Center. And they
Mm-hmm.
were producing a pop-up exhibition in New York City's Chinatown called Control
Yeah.
Alt. They gave us a grant because they wanted us to be part of their exhibition. And I told them, I'm not Asian. I told them just like that. And they were like, well, we don't want this show to be exclusive to Asians. We want to show the diaspora. So I said, well,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to show the diaspora, then I'm the right person to talk
Yeah.
to, because we have an Asian presence in our people as Latins. You know, after
Yeah.
the Chinese Exclusion Act of the early 1800s, we saw a massive immigration of Asians into Latin America. To this
Yeah.
day, we have 4 million self-identifying Asians throughout Latin America, with very
Mm-hmm.
large pockets in Mexico, and especially in the Dominican Republic, where you actually
Mm-hmm.
have a barrio chino.
Mm-hmm.
Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Korean are the most prominent Asian communities throughout Latin America. So when I had this
Mm-hmm.
grant and this opportunity to create this comic book for the Smithsonian Museum, well, I jumped at it. In fact, I had to stop production on my first issue of La Borinqueña so that I could be in this exhibition. And so
Mm-hmm.
I produced this exhibition. I had a gigantic wall dedicated to all the original artwork. We made like mini versions of our comic books that we distributed to everyone that participated at the exhibition. But as a storyteller, I always knew that this character was going to evolve to one day be a superhero. But I wanted the
Yeah.
story to be organic. I didn't just want it to be just batang, just kind of like thrown out there. I wanted to be an evolution of a story. I wanted the
Mm-hmm.
character to develop. I wanted it to be like a yes moment. If you were following the story and you saw her become this hero, it was like, oh, of course, yes, of course, she should be a hero. And in terms of her being LGBTQ, it's like in Chinese, Lala literally is slang for lesbian. So it was, the
Mm-hmm.
clue was there from the very beginning,
Yeah.
and it's just a part of our identity and our culture, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to say, oh, I have family members, because I do,
Mm-hmm.
that are gay, but it's just a fact of acknowledging the true diversity of what it is to be human and what it is to be Latinx,
Yeah.
and her evolution and her introduction are just part of the growing storytelling that we're doing with La Borinqueña. La Borinqueña is the title of the book, the title of the series, but what it is it's introducing a whole new universe of characters,
Yeah.
superhero characters, regular characters, and characters that look like us. You know that
Yeah.
you have La Borinqueña, who's an Afro Puerto Rican. You have Lala, who is Asian Latinx, specifically Chinese Dominican, and you have so many other characters that show the complete spectrum. One of the characters in the book, her name is Sofia. She's rubia, she's blonde, and it
Uh-huh.
just shows that kind of rainbow that is being Latin. You know, and
Yeah.
that we all culturally identify as being Latin, Puerto Rican, Dominican, whatever we are. But it's a part of who we are and how we see ourselves. But it's important that we show the world what we look like. And it's
Yeah.
important that we don't just kind of like homogenize ourselves into just one complexion, one look, one hair texture, and that we're actually
Yeah.
like this kind of like heterogeneous group, this really
Mm-hmm.
diverse group that really celebrates and embraces its diversity.
Yes, I love it. Listen, I can't wait to see what you come up with next. You know, I'm a fan like so many other people, and I mean, this was just a treat, to have this conversation with you because estaba curiosa. I was like, dying. I'm like, I just need to hear it from him and be able to share it with everybody that tunes into, to this programming and this content, because I think yeah, I see that, you're just going to continue to soar. And I just love that you're creating this, right? For people to really get to know the yumminess, right? Of diverse cultures
Yeah,
and Latin
it's like a
culture.
sancocho. It's like
Yeah,
a good,
totally.
a really
It was
delicious sancocho. Just throw
exactly.
all those ingredients in there, stir it up, serve everybody a bowl, and buen
Exactly.
provecho. You
Yes,
know,
totally. Well, listen, thank you so much for spending this time with
of course,
me. And again, anything, cualquier cosa que necesite, estoy aquí a tu orden. And
gracias,
I'm
Tanya.
looking forward you're the next book, because I'm sure it's already cooking in the pot, right?
It is. It is. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share this story with you and our work with you and your audience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one, okay? Chao.
Se me cuida.
Un abrazo. Bye bye.
Igual, igual.
This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. We want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. We're on Spotify and iTunes as well. There's more to come next week. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to speak up.